Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J-Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. I've got my sleeves rolled up, ready to unleash the inner sports beast, as I have plenty to say over the course of the next hour or so, as this is the J-Reels Podcast with Joe's J-Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And before I even get to baseball or anything else, yes, I have to unpack week one in the NFL. And moving forward, I'll probably sprinkle in baseball to start, especially once we get to October in the postseason, and maybe something earth-shattering that may supersede what the NFL has to offer. But I'm going to start there only for two reasons. One is because if the first weekend, which still has one more game tonight, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with the Jets in San Francisco, or Santa Clara in this case. But if what we witnessed here from Thursday night, Friday night, and all day yesterday is any indication of what this NFL season is going to be, and let's face it, the NFL over the last few years has been a bit lackluster. And I get it, not every Sunday throughout the course of 18 weeks or 17 games is going to be nothing but fun-filled, drama-filled, intrigue, just, oh my God, did you see what happened? Moments and games of that nature. No, I get it. That will not be the case. But considering that the anticipation leading up to this particular season, this weekend with the first opening season Friday game, as we saw in Sao Paulo, and everything that transpired yesterday, boy, this could be one for the record books. And not only that, but the flip side, as we almost put the lid on what had taken place over the last, 72 hours plus, when we take the 30,000 foot view and we get to see that the NFL and everything that they represent, and even with some of the news off the field heading into yesterday, which added a little bit of spice to the 425 Cowboys and Browns game. And for 30 teams that have already played their games, and in 15 of those cities, I'm sure there are a lot of the fans that are puffing their chest out, having Super Bowl aspirations dancing in their head. And then there's 15 other cities that right now that are 0-1 and are thinking that the sky is falling and that the season is over. And in particular, and that's where I'm going to start. I want to start more with the teams of the cities that the sky is falling, as opposed to the ones that think that it's all coconuts and palm trees here, where they are already punching their tickets to New Orleans for Super Bowl 59. Because the losers that come out of yesterday, the ones that really sting, are the ones that are going to really make you scratch your head after this first week. And I understand that this is an overreaction, which generally happens after week one when you're someone like myself handicapping what had taken place. So for starters, I want to get to those losers, and to me, there are four of them. The first one I'm going to go is with the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons, with their big-time acquisitions, including their quarterback Kirk Cousins, the $180 million contract, and the $100 million guaranteed, for them to get off to a good start. They had a drive which led to a field goal, and then they got a touchdown there later on where the offense wasn't really clicking, but they certainly were moving the ball against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then for whatever the reason, in the second half, they went belly up. They did not perform well, and the real Kirk Cousins showed, as he had a big interception there in that fourth quarter where they were trying to drive to take the go-ahead score, where the Steelers in their own right, and I'll get to the Steelers more so later in this game, but just to center in on the Falcons, that was as brutal and as rough of a start that you could possibly imagine. And we get it. Kirk Cousins, during a regular season, he has his moments. He's very efficient. He's a good quarterback. But for whatever the reason, in big games, and not to say that week one was a big game, but because he's changing uniforms from Minnesota to Atlanta, signing the big deal, as I mentioned, and for him to go out there, and yes, could we give credit to the Steelers defense? Absolutely. But that was not a performance that I'm sure Arthur Blank, standing there on the sidelines at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, was one that I'm sure he probably exhaled and said, did I make the right decision in signing this guy? And we understand quarterbacks don't grow on trees. We get it that there's not going to be a top 5 quarterback that's going to be out there that's just waiting in the wings to be signed. Those guys are going to be signed, sealed, and delivered before they can even reach free agency, where Cousins is a guy that's been in the league now, this is his 12th year, I believe, bouncing around from Washington to Minnesota and now here to Atlanta, and that was as bad of a start that you could possibly imagine if you're a Falcon fan. So for those who I picked them as an over this year at 8.5, that was not the start that you wanted to get from your quarterback. The other team that really puzzled me from yesterday was the Cleveland Browns. And there's actually people stating that should Deshaun Watson even start next week? What are you, nuts? The guy has gotten $230 million guaranteed. He was supposed to be the savior in Cleveland, considering what he did in Houston. And I'm talking about on the field, not off. And even though he's had his moments in Houston, winning a playoff game and showing some Pro Bowl talent, but other than that, it's not as if he's ascended to anywhere near the top 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks, even when he was in Houston. And pretty much from his time in Cleveland, after being suspended for those first 11 games, coming back to a real incomplete last 5 or 6 games of a season last year, although he did have that big game against Baltimore, where they came from behind, they were down by 14 and they won in Baltimore, a big road win, but then had the shoulder injury. And then yesterday, and I don't know if you want to attribute it to rust. I don't know if you want to attribute it, even the same with Kirk Cousins for that matter, where they're not getting a lot of reps or at least a game time feel when it comes to these preseason games. And think about it. They only played 3 of these games. And even if they got some action, from their last preseason game to the start of the season is almost 3 weeks, really 2.5 when you think about it, because they end that preseason schedule on a Thursday, which was 2 weeks prior to the start of the season between Baltimore and Kansas City. So when you have that much more or long of a layoff, and then to get under center to go up against competition that you hadn't faced in, let's face it, 8-9 months, especially if you didn't play in the preseason. And mind you, even if it's against second and third stringers, at least you get the feel, at least you get the reps of the fast pace, the action of what it's like to be under center and to get that into the bloodstream, so to speak. When you don't have that, you're going to have performances like Cousins and even Deshaun Watson yesterday, who was just god-awful. If you watch that first half between them and the Cowboys, you would think that the Browns, that was their first time they ever stepped foot on a football field. That's how pathetic they were. They only got, 52 total yards of offense in the first half. They couldn't muster up anything. Granted, they even had a lead early on when they led 3-0 on a field goal by Dustin Hopkins. But besides that, that offense was pretty much in their practice facility trying to get ready for week 1, which will be next week when they start their season, because that was a putrid effort by the Browns, no matter how you slice it. Speaking of staying in that state, all you got to do is go now from Northeast Ohio to Southwest Ohio, because the Bengals, and I picked them as my knockout pool pick. I tried to get a little cute only because, yes, I did think about the Saints yesterday and we saw what they did to the Panthers. No need to unpack that game. And even Washington, good performance there by Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, they seem to be in sync. Jaden Daniels, I get it that it's his first game. Played pretty well, didn't turn the ball over, did some stuff with his legs, a lot of stuff with his arm, but that was more late as they didn't really do much in the first half. But they fell short against the Buccaneers as Tampa gets off to a good start at 1-0, and I picked them as an over this year. But for the Bengals, at home against a Patriot team with a new coach and Jacoby Brissett, who knows the program, being there many years ago when Bill Belichick was the coach, and obviously Tom Brady, Brissett played a lot of those first few games when Brady was on the shelf due to the suspension from Deflategate. And for the Bengals, where Joe Burrow, you would think he wanted to get off to a tremendous start with all of the preseason hullabaloo regarding Jamar Chase's contract, even T. Higgins to a certain extent, and Burrow coming off of the injury last year, where I'm sure he wanted to come flying out of the gate against a lesser opponent, and I would think they probably took them for granted, number one, and number two, maybe not enough reps in the preseason to where he only mustered 164 yards in the air, and they were just flat as a pancake, losing to the Patriots 16-10 at home. And that'll be the last time I pick Cincinnati, because think about it. The last 2 years, they have come out of the gate very slow. 5 interceptions on opening day against the Steelers 2 years ago. And then last year, remember, they lost their first 2 games of the season in Cleveland and then at home to Baltimore to start off 0-2. And that was just a slog of a season for the Bengals to where they couldn't get back to a postseason. They couldn't see if they could get to back-to-back title games as they did in the AFC and, of course, the Super Bowl 3 years ago. And that was just a pathetic performance there by the Bengals, no matter how you slice it. And then lastly, you have the Giants. And I understand the Giants aren't on that level with the Bengals, as well as, forget about the Falcons. The Falcons are just trying to get there, but with all of their overhaul throughout the offseason, as we know. And then when we also take a look at the Browns, considering that with Deshaun Watson and with them winning 12 games, making it into the playoffs last year, I'm sure there was some big-time expectations for that Brown team. Giants, not so much, although they did make it to the playoffs 2 years ago, but this was going to be the year boom or bust for the quarterback, Daniel Jones. And what did you see there yesterday? A complete bust, combustible all over MetLife Stadium to the tune where he was booed 3 plays into the season, on top of getting booed at halftime, throwing an inexplicable interception to Andrew Van Ginkel deep in his own territory, where he tried to throw a screen pass and Van Ginkel was right there, early Christmas gift or maybe even a Halloween gift, if you want to call it that, as he just literally walked into the end zone. And even afterwards, watching video of Daniel Jones, and I don't know, maybe they set him up for this. I thought when the home crowd or the home team leaves the stadium, that they leave from underneath the stadium, outside the locker room, and then just drive off into the night and home to their respite to where they could get away from what happened there 3 hours at MetLife earlier that afternoon. No, they actually had Daniel Jones walk out of the stadium and to the parking lot to where he was serenaded with, "Go home, you suck." Boy, if things couldn't get any worse for the Giant quarterback, well, it certainly did there yesterday. And not to say the Giants are going to have any big expectations to those aforementioned teams, but that was as dreadful of a start that you could get from, and I don't want to hear Danny Dimes, that nickname, out the window. Daniel Jones, this is going to be it for him, and who knows what the remainder of the season. Now, they're going to go to Washington to play the Commanders next week, so maybe that's a game that they could win, even though the Commanders are a home opener for them, but it is looking rather ghostly in what could be a ghost town at MetLife, especially for the Big Blue. Who knows about gangrene, but the Giants, that was as pitiful as you could possibly get. And I get it, we could break down some winners and things of that nature because we could talk about teams that have gotten off to flying starts. New Orleans, I'm sure they're going to think that, hey, maybe people are going to sleep on us, that we could be in contention with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and with the likes of the, losing my train of thought here, J-Reels. It's obviously not going to be Carolina because they just spanked them, or the Atlanta Falcons because obviously they're 0-1. I was thinking that maybe you had 3 teams that 1-0 in the NFC South, so my apologies there. But New Orleans got off to a great start there. Derek Carr, who a lot of people think is a guy that may be trying to show his mettle and show his worth. He's had his moments in the NFL, but he's been, at best, slightly above average. And I'm not talking about above average. He's slightly average, a little bit above that. And a guy that is certainly underperformed over the last couple of years, and especially last year in New Orleans. Well, that's a city and that's a team that is looking to go crazy and to think that, hey, maybe we could be a part of the NFC, not only winning a division, having a home game. I understand. This is after week 1, overreactions, etc. I'll talk about the Steelers now. Usually I save them for last. Nothing to write home about offensively. If your name is Chris Boswell, he was your MVP, hitting 3 field goals from 50-plus yards, 51, 56, and 57. And even had to come into punt as Cameron Johnston got injured on a rush there in the 4th quarter where the Falcons tried to block a punt. And Boswell had a decent punt in his own right. It was a line drive, but the special teams certainly made their tackle where the return was very minimal. But for Justin Fields, who started in the wake of Russell Wilson with that calf injury that he suffered during training camp, and it was not cooperating throughout the course of the week. So now you're going to have a quarterback controversy on whether or not, if Wilson is healthy, is he going to play this coming week? And think about it. You know Russell Wilson's going to be chomping at the bit to start this upcoming game because the Steelers go to Denver. And that's all I need to say about that. But as far as the game yesterday goes, for Justin Fields, who played okay, was efficient in the passing game, showed off his arm on a few plays, especially to George Pickens, ran with the ball, had a terrible fourth down. Now, I'm not going to blame it on him. I'm going to blame it on the play call late at 15-10, where they were deep in Falcon territory, 4th and 1, and yes, they should have gone for it as they did, but this reminded me a little bit of the Michigan-Alabama game where Jalen Milroe, if you recall, and I believe that was on the shotgun snap, where it may not have been, but Milroe did not move the pile, did not get the first down there late against Michigan, and that's when Michigan turned it around and actually won the game, where thankfully, if you're a Steelers fan, that wasn't the case here. But that play call I did not like. I should have seen a naked boot there or something different than him trying to go up the gut or try to go left tackle, where he slipped to start and then obviously didn't even make it back or barely made it back to the line of scrimmage. But the Steelers defense prevailed here. TJ Watt had a couple of sacks nullified by penalties, and that hurt the Steelers throughout the course of the game, especially when it came to pushing the Falcons back. But TJ Watt did get the sack to ice the game there at the end on the game's final play. But the defense was just stellar. You had some contributions there by Beanie Bishop, as well as interceptions there on that second interception. That was Kirk Cousins' career in a nutshell. How he threw that pass, and I get it. The pocket was collapsing. He tried to make a play, and I understand you don't want to take a sack there. It's tough, but still, he just made a terrible pass, which was easily picked off. I know I could have intercepted that if it was yours truly. And you had a couple of interceptions there, even one there in the second quarter, which led to a field goal. But the Steelers defense, and that's what's going to be predicated. What you saw yesterday is going to be the blueprint for this year. Try to get to be the first team to 20, and in this case, they had 18, all on field goals, I might add. But to play rock-solid defense, pressure the quarterback, and try to win ugly 17-16, 20-17, or in this case, 18-10 type games. That's the blueprint for the Steelers this year. So let's see how they fare next week in Denver with the altitude mile high, and I'm sure we're going to find out whether or not Russell Wilson will play this week. Now, does Justin Fields deserve to start next week? I think he did okay. He wasn't spectacular. He wasn't overwhelming. He wasn't a guy that maybe kept the job, but he certainly didn't lose it. So who knows? Is Russell Wilson going to be a good team guy as he's been throughout training camp? But if Tomlin does offer the starting job to Fields, is he going to pout? Personally, I think he probably won't, because he is a veteran. He knows his way around the block. But I'm sure he's going to be stewing on the inside, knowing that he's going to want to get back to this franchise, get back at this. He had his former head coach and one Sean Payton. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there. And even when you look at other cities that a lot of people are going to be glowing, and let's just say Dallas is another one. And I bring them up only because of the news yesterday where Dak Prescott, in the 11th hour, figuratively and literally, where at around 11 a.m. yesterday, over, I'm sure, some French toast and maybe a little bit of a scrambled egg and hash browns, to where Dak Prescott signs the richest contract in NFL history. 4 years, $240 million, but that's not even the best part about it if you're the Prescott family. 231, eclipsing the aforementioned Deshaun Watson's $230 million guaranteed contract. So 231 of that is guaranteed. So that means $60 million a year, if you do the math, 231 million of that guaranteed. And this is a guy, as we all know, do I need to break it down? In the 8 years that he's been in the NFL, he's won 2 wildcard games. And yes, he may be in the running for MVPs in a regular season, as he did last year, and put up some big-time numbers. But we all know it's going to be based on what he does in January and, dare I even say, February. And that's not to knock Dak Prescott. We know he's a great guy, Walter Payton Man of the Year, etc. But when we see what is transpired on the field, he has not delivered, especially in big games. And you can even talk about that in the regular season as well. Whether it was in San Francisco there last year when they got blitzed 42-10, or even later on in the year where they lost in Philadelphia, or lost in Buffalo, or lost in Miami. To me, as I said last year, and I'll say it this year, Miami and Dallas are similar in that regard, because they're a team that can win at home and they win big and can put up big numbers, but on the road they can't win a big game, especially come playoff time. So for Prescott, And he said all the right things in the postgame. He says, hey, it's not about the money. I want to win Super Bowls. I'm dying to win. I'm glad to do it here, etc. And let's see. I'm sure the Cowboy fan right now, they're shaking the silver and blue pom-poms and the cheerleaders are going crazy. But guess what? The Cowboys could go 17-0. They could go 16-1. They could go 12-5 the way they had the last 3 years. As I like to say time and time again, it don't mean a thing if you ain't got that ring. And that's it. And we know with the Cowboys, it's about championships. It's not about division titles. It's not about winning a wild card game. Yes, can you get to an NFC championship? I'm sure the Cowboy fan, they would sign for that in blood. But if you're Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, and we know Jones is all about the brand and the star and making $1 zillion, as we all know that the franchise is worth over $10 billion with a B. But let's see what Dak Prescott will do this year. And Prescott wasn't really impressive in the game yesterday. Their defense was spectacular. Maybe it was more an indictment on the Brown offense than it was the Cowboy defense, but they did play great. Got to give it up. Pressured and sacked the quarterback, Deshaun Watson, I believe 5 times, had a zillion pressures on him and was just under siege all day. But kudos to the Cowboy fans, as I'm sure right now they are just dancing after week 1 thinking that a Super Bowl appearance may be in the forefront of their brains. But we all know there's still plenty of season to go. And even the Lions, for that matter. Yesterday, we know the Lions in a very suspenseful game there Sunday night. I watched bits and pieces. I didn't watch the whole thing. I've been watching football the whole day, and I had to take a break. But for the Lions, give it up for what they did. 26-20, winning in overtime, getting that touchdown there to cap it all off. I believe that was David Montgomery who got the winner. Let me double check that. I don't want to be speaking out of school here. But the Lions, big-time aspirations, and we know the expectations are huge there in the Motor City. But for them to get off to a good start, and they played their wild card opponent from last year, where that was a game that was tooth and nail. But for the Lions, I'm sure that that was one that they wanted to get, not only in front of their fans and in front of their former quarterback there, Matthew Stafford, and yes, David Montgomery did have the touchdown run to ice the game as the Lions got off the deck there, winners at 1-0, and I'm sure the fans there of the Lions are thinking, hey, that's one, and let's get back to an NFC Championship game so we could get to a Super Bowl, which, of course, no Lion fan alive has ever seen the Lions play in the big game. But as I go through the rest of the schedule, let's go back to Thursday night as we rewind. Baltimore and Kansas City. I know it's going to come down to that final play. And how I look at it is that it didn't even have to come down to that final play where Isaiah Likely had his toe there barely touching the back line of the end zone. It brought me memories of Kevin Durant, different sport, I get it. Kevin Durant, Game 7 in the conference semifinals against the Bucks, where if his toe wasn't on the three-point line, chances are the Nets would have advanced and maybe would have played and won an NBA final, considering they would have gone against the Phoenix Suns. Now, mind you, they still would have had to overcome another series on top of that for them to get to a conference final. And again, this was all moot, but with Kevin Durant stepping on the line, which would have advanced the Nets, obviously with Likely stepping on the line, the Ravens would have stolen the game because the coach, John Harbaugh, would have gone for 2. Now, we wouldn't have known whether or not they would have completed that and would have won 28-27. That we'll never know. But that was just a tough break because the play before, Lamar Jackson overthrew a wide-open Zay Flowers in the end zone, which would have tied the game there. So for people that could come out and say, oh, well, they should have tied the game as Lamar Jackson thought he was in, as well as Isaiah Likely, but come on. We know that he was out of bounds. Clearly, blind man could see that. But here's the difference between a guy like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. Does Patrick Mahomes miss Zay Flowers on that touchdown throw, which would have been a touchdown throw, the play before the Likely touchdown that was called back? No, he would have not. And that's the thing about Lamar Jackson that you're going to have to live with. Jackson is dynamic. Jackson is explosive. Jackson, as you saw, 100 and whatever it was, 12 yards on the ground, 16 carries. And it was 122 now that I see it. And he did go in there with shoulders, which is dangerous if you ask me. Lamar Jackson doesn't need to do that. He needs to slide more often if you ask me. And you would think, John Harbaugh, come on. That is your franchise quarterback, your 2-time MVP. Can you tell the guy to slide? And this is why Harbaugh is an overrated coach. I don't care that he won a Super Bowl back in, Super Bowl 47 in the 2012 season. Yes, you can't take it away from him. Yes, it's on his resume, but he is overrated. He needs to slide A, and you can even go back to the championship game last year when Lamar Jackson is throwing his helmet after throwing interceptions, where you could just pull him by the top of his jersey to say, son, you got to be composed. You got to be relaxed. No throwing helmets, no throwing tantrums. Come on, let's go. Take a couple of deep breaths and let's go. And Harbaugh does not do that. That's why, to me, he's overrated. So for the Ravens, and one more time, I know I'm going to pile on them now, and this is just from what I see, people, not because I hate the Ravens, and I do, and hate from a sports standpoint. But the Ravens and their offense, I could be a defensive coordinator, and I would salivate against them. Because all they do is throw to the tight end, or they'll throw to Justice Hill, the running back, and maybe an occasional throw to Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman, yeah, he did have a big catch in the game, but they never go to the wide receivers. And Zay Flowers, I get it. He's that guy who's a wide out. He plays in the slot, whatever. But all the targets go to the tight ends. And Marc Andrews had a couple of catches, was not a factor, which is usually his security blanket. You already know that Isaiah likely is the guy that, I hate to use this pun, that he's likely going to go to in these games. And Derrick Henry, 13 carries. I get it that the Ravens, they're not a team that can play from behind. They have to play from in front. And they were behind, for the most part, the whole night. So therefore, you're going to see a lot of the tight ends. Yeah, you're going to see some screens to Hill. You're going to see some dump-offs there to Zay Flowers to see if you can get a home run from him in that regard. But that is the Raven offense. You haven't learned anything new about this team. And the Chiefs are the Chiefs. That's all I'm going to say about that. Mahomes, when he needs to win a game, he's going to win it. As evidence is what you saw there on Thursday night. And then the Sao Paulo game, which I did not watch, and I'm not going to unpack. I know Saquon Barkley, to the Giants fans' chagrin, had 3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, and 1 receiving touchdown. And the big news coming out of this one is Jordan Love, as it looks like he's going to be sidelined for 4 weeks with a sprained MCL. That is a huge blow for the Packers as they now try to piecemeal what they're going to do in order for them. Come on, Malik Willis, is that going to be the guy? They're looking at 0-4 if Malik Willis is your starter to start off this year, and who knows if they're going to be any part of the NFC playoff landscape. So that's the big news coming out of there. And if you're the Eagles, you get a win, you get out of Sao Paulo, good for them. And you know how I feel about the game in Sao Paulo. Now, as far as yesterday, another big injury, as I'm sure people in Buffalo are holding their bated breath on Josh Allen as he was leaping into the end zone and landed on his left hand. Who knows what the prognosis is as of right now, whether it's broken, fractured. Thankfully, it's his left hand, not his right, but it's quite possible that if there is some damage to that hand, how is he going to take snaps? They may have to go to the backup there and a one Mitchell Trubisky, which I'm sure the Bills fans are shuddering in their boots at the thought of that. Take it from me as a Steel fan watching him over the last couple of years. But Buffalo, they had to fight tooth and nail to win that game yesterday against Arizona, and they were game. Give it up for the Cardinals. Maybe they tried to show the NFL world or their fans that, you know what, we may not be near the tops of the NFC West, but we're going to show that we're game. We're going to show that we're going to be competitive. And they did do that there yesterday, even though it was in a loss there at Orchard Park. The Bears, I am sure that there are a lot of people thinking that, hey, our quarterback led us to a win. That was more defense, and that was more of special teams, if anything, for the Bears winning that game, because Caleb Williams even admitted, I got to do better, and I will play better next week moving forward. He was 14 for 29 for 93 yards. He was awful. And all you could say one more time is that the Bears special teams bailed him out. They had the block punt by Jonathan Owens that was returned for a touchdown. And the other was a pick six there by Tyreek Stevenson. If it wasn't for that, the Titans would have left Chicago with a win, and a lot of questions that would have had to be unanswered throughout the course of the week with the head coach, even with the quarterback, but that gets erased based on the Bears winning 24-17. Then you have the Dolphins and a very just unusual scene there prior to the start of the game where Tyreek Hill was pulled over right outside the Hard Rock Stadium for reckless driving to the point where he was handcuffed, was actually on the ground face down, and they even had his teammates, Jonnu Smith and Calais Campbell, come out just to kind of see what was going on, and they were even detained just to wonder why that they were even going to be around. But Tyreek Hill appreciated that gesture, knowing that he feels good about his team, that they had his back. Where Tyreek Hill, again, if this was just a situation where it was reckless driving, I don't know, maybe he was late approaching the tunnel or approaching the ballpark to where he was speeding. I don't know what was the scene there, but the one thing I did notice was the video of him face down, handcuffed, and being just, I don't want to say accosted by the police officer, who right now is on administrative leave, so he's going to get paid, and who knows if there's going to be a suspension or whatever, but that was just a bad job. I get it that you're going to pull him over, and maybe rightfully so for what had happened there, but to have him out in handcuffs, that was just terrible. But Tyreek Hill did add, 130 yards in the game, had an 80-yard touchdown to boot, and even mocked in a celebration of him being handcuffed where Jalen Waddle was standing behind him. So maybe that was his two middle fingers to the cop that put him in that position. But the Dolphins were able to save face. They were down in this game where Jacksonville, although not impressive offensively, but they got a last-second kick to win the game, and the Dolphins go up with a 1-0 in the win column, beating Jacksonville there. Other games of note, Houston winning on the road at Indianapolis. Good game for C.J. Stroud. And Anthony Richardson, although did try to do what he could to keep his team within striking distance, but was unable to get that next score. So Houston, give it up. Good road win for them, as there's a lot of expectations, and I'm sure people down in Houston dancing and thinking of Super Bowl visions as well. Then you have the Chargers beating the Raiders. You had a big brawl there in the end zone where Jim Harbaugh gets his first victory as head coach of the LA Chargers. So who knows if that's going to be good footing for them to see if they can get off to a good start, which they did yesterday, but kind of build the momentum there. And if you're Antonio Pierce, I get it. Your quarterback's Gardner Minshew. You don't have a lot there in the cupboard. But for at least one game, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board to see what happens there. And for the Chargers, I'm sure everybody is happy and thinking that with the quarterback and even with the coach that, hey, could we get to a Super Bowl this year? Remains to be seen. And then you have Denver and Seattle. Bo Nix with 2 interceptions. Not a good start for him there. Geno Smith with a bumbling touchdown of 34 yards. And the Seahawks, who a lot of people think that they could impress this year, to go along with Kenneth Walker's 103 yards. Good start there for the Seahawks. And I'm sure a lot of people thinking that they could be in the mix in the NFC West and maybe be possible of some Super Bowl talk. Like I mentioned, that was the theme from the start, people. 15 cities that right now are thinking, all right, maybe we could have a good season and get to a Super Bowl, where the others, the sky is falling. And I think that covers all the games there from the weekend. Tonight you have the Jets in San Francisco. I'm sure the Jet fan, they're wishing and hoping that 5 is the big number. Why do I say that? The Jet fan is hoping that Aaron Rodgers gets to his 5th play, because as we all know, last year at this time, Monday night against the Bills at home, he made it to 4 plays before his Achilles blew out. And that is going to be a very fascinating scenario. That defense going up against Aaron Rodgers in his first action since that game against Buffalo last year on a Monday night. And I think the Niners will prevail. I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets go in and start throwing the ball all over the lot. I know you're going to see a lot of Breece Hall. And their defense, let's see if they can play with a lead to maybe try to tee off on Brock Purdy and slow down that Niner offense. So I think it's a very good game to wrap up week 1. And we will see and talk a little bit more about that on Thursday and take a look at the schedule at that time. And that's your week 1. What more can I say, people? A great start to the NFL season. And let's see how this is all going to shape up as we move along here for the remainder of the 17 weeks and beyond. Let me see if there's anything else I need to bring up here when it comes to the NFL. Oh, yeah, let me bring up a couple of quickies here. Number 1, Roger Goodell. He's at it again, people. There was talk before the season, and maybe it was in Sao Paulo when he discussed how he wants more international games on the schedule. Now, there's 5 this year. We already had the one in Sao Paulo, and there's 4 more. I believe 3 in London and the one that's in Germany. I don't know if it's in Frankfurt or Munich, but you have 4 more left on the schedule. All right, you would think, what does he want? 8 games overseas? All right, maybe he wants 6. Let's round it out to get 6. All right, 8, maybe no more than 8, right? No, 10? 10 games? It can't be 10 games. Wait, 12? No, come on, J-Reels. 12 international games? Well, no, 14? Wait a minute, 14 games overseas? Hear me out, people. Roger Goodell has come out and stated that the high end that he's looking at are 16 international games. 1-6. Are you serious? What's going to happen here? And I know that they want to have a team in London. That is the goal, because it's like going from LA to New York. 5-hour flight there, 6+ flight back. And considering that these players and coaches, everybody, they fly charter first class with all the amenities, why not in 2028 and beyond? Who knows? But can we be serious? 16 international games. This is why the NFL, I've had it up to here with them. I'm sick of the greed. I'm sick of them trying to expand globally. I'm sick of them trying to reach out to places where, think about it, Brazil, soccer is king there. And I don't want to see all the videos of the NFL fans wearing Brady jerseys and representing. Of course they're going to show that. And who knows if the NFL has probably sent fans over there. Or maybe it's a scenario where they paid personnel to go there to show up, to make it look like there's an NFL contingency down in Sao Paulo. I'll give you London to a certain extent because they play games in London. But 16 international games? When does it stop? I'm just going to leave it there. Wash my hands. And then the other thing, we have a Super Bowl halftime performer. And I brought this up on my YouTube channel yesterday, and I'm sure you're going to get some laughs over this. I'm sure when the news broke down, I guess maybe it was right around lunchtime, or let's say brunch, because it was right before the 1 o'clock games, that my wife brought it up to me because I didn't even know. And I was looking out for it because I believe in the past, don't they usually announce that the Friday before? But of course, they had a game on Friday, so they couldn't upstage the Friday game with the news of who's going to be the halftime performer. And the week prior, I was talking about it with the wife and a few other friends, sister-in-law, etc. Like, oh, who's going to be the halftime performer? And we try to guess, whatever. But the NFL, they're jumping on the bandwagon. The NFL, with all the buzz that had happened in the spring and into the summer, one of the anthems of the year, and no, it's not Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter. Why am I even bringing her up? Because it's not as if I listen to her music. But with that being said, it is none other than Kendrick Lamar. So, go back to lunchtime, brunch time, etc. How did the strawberry champagne and the French toast that's stuffed with bananas and probably with a little dusting of powdered sugar go down in the Drake household when he heard of the news that Kendrick Lamar is going to be a halftime performer? I'm sure that didn't go well, and maybe the glass of champagne or rosé or whatever his preference of beverage was probably thrown off of his balcony, wherever he may be, or dumped into his hot tub, because I'm sure that did not go well with the Champagne Poppy, as he's called on Instagram. Woo! I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when he heard about that news. And I thought about this minutes after, and even my wife thought about this too. Now, I don't know if he would do this, and I would think that chances are the likelihood of this happening will be slim to none. But watch it be a thing. Super Bowl, where he's doing his songs and he's performing, and I've heard that his live performances are great. Even my wife's seen him live years ago, and he was fantastic. And I have nothing against Kendrick Lamar. I love a lot of his early stuff, and I think he's fantastic. No doubt. Do I have him on rotation in my iPod or iPhone or whatever? iPod, I'm dating myself. Do I? No. They're not like, not like us, the song that came out with the feud with Drake. Not my favorite. And I'm more of a beats guy, and yes, the lyrics too, but the beat doesn't hit for me, and I get it, people can think, oh, you're old man. I'm a boom bap guy. I live in the Bronx where hip hop was birthed. So you can't tell me anything other than if it's not boom bap, if it's not hard hitting, if it's not gonna be that Jeep beat, and sorry, Not Like Us is not that, okay? And I'm not trying to throw cold water on Kendrick Lamar or that song, whatever, because I love his old stuff. I love Swimming Pools. I love, of course, Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. I love Alright. Alright is a great song, great video. How can you not vibe to that? But Not Like Us, not my favorite. But with that being said, could there be a pairing of the duo and a surprise and a shock to not only the sports world, but the entire pop culture, hip hop, or rap, music world overall? Would it be out of the realm of possibility? Keep that receipt for that time as I conclude my NFL segment. All right, let me get to some other things. This is going to go over an hour. I'm already at 40 minutes. And moving forward, people, I'm not going to go through every NFL game. I did so with this one. If I'm going to have to trim the fat on some of these games, like for instance, New Orleans and Carolina, now I didn't even go into that game. But my point being is that I'll be here all day talking about the NFL stuff and not get to the other stuff that matters as well. But with NFL Week 1, I had to give it its due, so there we go. Keeping my helmet and shoulder pads on in college football, the two interesting developments. The Longhorns, what a performance. Quinn Ewers, who already, if you want to put him the Heisman favorite after 2 weeks, you can certainly do that. Going into the big house, throwing for what, 246 yards or 248, I believe it was. And 3 TDs, silencing every Wolverine fan from Ann Arbor to Saginaw. And for them to go in there, and the game was over at halftime, 24-3. The Michigan offense, a far cry from the J.J. McCarthy, Roman Wilson, Blake Cohen offense led from last year, and Sharon Moore is not Jim Harbaugh, and not trying to throw cold water on the blue and maize, but boy, that was one that you just want to flush and forget about. But for Texas, this was one that is going to stick. And with some games coming in the future, and especially in a month from now when they play Georgia, and that is going to be one that I'm anticipating, but that's for next month, I get it. But right now, the Longhorns, they look stout. They look like they belong in that discussion when it comes to getting to a national title and winning. And mind you, when they moved up one in the rankings there with that victory in Ann Arbor, the rest is SEC loaded as expected. Whether it's Georgia, whether it's Alabama, or you're going down the list. Texas, obviously they're part of the SEC now. But for Texas, I think it was more about them than Michigan. Now, we'll talk about Michigan in a second because that was going to be a hostile environment. You knew that the students, faculty, everybody was going to be up for that game. But Texas went in there and shut them down and pretty much silenced them from start to finish. More so in that second quarter when they extended the game and made it 24-3 at the half. And even though there was a late touchdown to make it look not even cosmetically better, but it was 31-6, it was 31-3. I mean, the game was just over pretty much when you got to the half. And kudos to Ewers, great performance there. And let's see if Texas will continue to build off this, as they're going to be one to mention here as we get deep into the season, barring injuries or barring a collapse. So kudos to the Longhorns. And if you're Michigan, it's back to the drawing board. Now, for them, they do have the safety net because they have the one loss. Now, mind you, they still have Ohio State down the road. And that game, I believe, off the top of my head, that game may be in Michigan. I don't think it's in Columbus. But that's for the latter part of November. But if you're Michigan, you lick your wounds and you get back at it. Your schedule is not that bad. I get it. You're going to have Penn State and Ohio State down the road. And Penn State, they haven't really threatened Michigan. But after that performance yesterday, I'm sure the Nittany Lions and their team are thinking, wait a minute, maybe we could finally put them to rest and get over the hump to beat Michigan as they haven't done here in recent years. And if they do so and then Ohio State beats them, Michigan may not qualify for the top 12 there when it's all said and done. And they certainly want to be playing for a conference championship if they have 3 losses. So just put that in the back of your memory bank, because for Michigan to lose this game, and I get it, it's Texas. It's not as if they lost to some slouch, but that is one that it's not going to sit well with you, despite the fact of the caliber of the Longhorns and their offense. But this could be one, and maybe even the start of a snowball for the Wolverines post-national championship from just 8 months ago. And then what the hell happened to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? They were ranked 5th, and they plummeted all the way to 18th because who did they lose to? Wait, all right, they didn't lose to Purdue. All right, they didn't lose to Navy. They don't play USC until the end of the year. They don't play any other powerhouse when you look on the schedule here. But they lost to a team that just blew me away, because when I had to look and see that the Huskies, no, not UConn, no, not Wisconsin or Washington, they lost to Northern Illinois. I couldn't pick out one player from Northern Illinois if my life depended on it. And that's not a knock, that's just a fact. I don't want to hear if you're a dyed-in-the-wool college football fan. Maybe even Mel Kiper couldn't even pick out a player from Northern Illinois because they're on nobody's radar. But for them to just lay like dogs, Notre Dame, And to have Northern Illinois be in the game, and they made a guy, no offense, and I'm sure hopefully he makes it to the NFL and has a good season, etc. But for Ontario Brown, no, not Antonio Brown, Ontario Brown, to muster up, and muster is strong, I get it, but he had over 220 yards of offense, him alone. And I'm not trying to make the Notre Dame defense out to the defenses of the past with Ara Parsegian and Lou Holtz, etc. But they couldn't contain this guy. He rushed for almost 100 yards, 20 carries with 99 yards. And mind you, he had 2 catches, but for 126 yards, including a touchdown, which pretty much iced the game for them. Now, it didn't ice the game because they had to kick a field goal with 31 seconds left. And even though the Fighting Irish had a last-second attempt of 62 yards to see whether or not that they could somehow salvage what would have been an embarrassing loss, and that didn't happen because that was blocked. And for the Fighting Irish, hey, listen, give it up to Northern Illinois for winning a game. It's the first time they've beaten a top 10 team. Let me enunciate a little bit better there, J Reels. In the history of their school, and so many things. Notre Dame, for the first time they lost to a team like that. I believe they were 51-1 when they led against a school that they were favored by 28.5 points. 28.5. And they lost. They didn't just, I can't even, when I just said 28.5, I really thought about that. They were more than a 4-touchdown lead, and they lost by 2. If you're a Fighting Irish fan, to my guy John Irving, you're not sick to your stomach. You're sick to your stomach. You have a headache, you have a toothache, and a backache because of this loss. And again, because you have the safety net of the college football playoff, you'll be fine. If this was last year, that would have gone a long way into maybe not qualifying for the top 4. But I'm sure they thank their lucky stars as well as Michigan, knowing that they do have another gateway to get to a playoff because of the 12 teams that will qualify come mid-December. So that's what happened with the college football. Let me turn my attention as I get in the batter's box for baseball. And there really isn't much to discuss here, people. I hate to say it. Because where we left off on Thursday, you only have 2 races. And yes, we could talk about the AL Central. I know the Royals, they swept the Twins over the weekend. So now they're 3 in a loss. I believe 2.5 back of the Guardians. But I've seen this movie already. They've come close only to fall back. They've come close only to fall back. And their schedule's a little bit tricky for Kansas City, and we'll talk about the schedule in a minute for at least the early part of the week. But for the AL East, we know that's going to come down to the wire. Yankees have a half-game lead over the Orioles. And as it was, the Yankees looking for a sweep in a bunch of low-scoring games at Wrigley. Yankees winning 3-0 on Friday. The big resounding ovation for one Anthony Rizzo. He was thankful. He'll never forget his memories of the city and the fan base of Chicago. He said it's unlike any other. And to me, that's not a knock on the Yankee fan. So for the Yankee fans, they're going to be, hey, what about us? Relax. That guy helped win a World Series that they have not seen in 8 years. So pipe down for the Yankee fan that thinks that Rizzo is insulting the Yankee fan for all the flowers that he threw at the Cub organization, the city, the fan base. So pump the brakes on that. I'm not trying to slight the Yankee fan by any stretch, but there were some sections where it's like, oh, all right, it's like that Anthony Rizzo. It's like, come on. Guy won a World Series that I haven't seen in a zillion years. So that's number one. And then you also have Nestor Cortez, who in relief on Saturday pitched 4 1/3 innings. And I get it that Cortez was perturbed by the thought of having to come out of the bullpen. And even though he said all the right things, where he came out and said anything to do to help the team, and yes, I'm glad I contributed. He only gave up 1 hit in the process of that 4 1/3 to get the win. But then he also said in the same breath how I was an opening day starter. Granted that I'm not Garrett Cole, and granted that Garrett Cole was hurt, but I started opening day. I've won games for this team. Which one is it, Nestor? Is it, hey, I belong to be a starter on this team? This was unexpected. I didn't see this coming, etc. But oh no, anything to help the team. I'm glad I contributed, etc. You can't have it both ways. And Cortez, who's pitched better of late and has been mediocre all year. He's what now, 9-10 with an ERA under 4. Far from the all-star that he was 2 years ago, and he has been hit or miss all year. Granted, better rate lately, I get it, but I don't want to hear from Cortez. He thinks he's the top of the rotation guy. Let's face it, he's a 3-starter at best on any rotation in Major League Baseball. So let's chill out with that. But after winning 2 out of 3 low-scoring games, 3-0, 2-0, and then a 2-1 loss yesterday to the Cubs. So they were able to get 2 out of 3 and gain a game in the process, where the Orioles, although they were won on Friday to gain back that game in the standings, but they lost the last 2 games at home to the Rays and had their tail between their legs where they're just a half game back. But we know that this is going to come down to those 3 games at Yankee Stadium, which I believe will be 2 weeks from today, or maybe the series starts Tuesday, but 2 weeks from this time, Yankees-Orioles will decide the AL East. And then the National League wild card, the Mets, who gained the game in the process. And it's interesting because 11 days ago, the Mets were 4 back of the Braves for the division. And when you look up on Saturday evening, the Mets actually had a game lead over the Braves and gained 5 games in the standings. Well, they had a 9-game winning streak snapped yesterday where the Reds scored 2 runs in the 9th. And listen, the Mets are going to lose at some point. So they lost, and then the Braves won in extras to where they got a run in the 9th. They actually had a chance where the Braves could have lost, but they tacked on a run in the 9th, and then they won in the 11th to make it 4-3. So now both teams are dead even for the final wildcard spot. And as it is, if the season ended today, the Mets, based on tiebreaker, would have the season series advantage over the Braves. So that's good news in that regard. But they still have that one series, which again, same time, Yankees-Orioles will be Braves-Mets in Atlanta. And do I need to bring up the House of Horrors that it's been, whether it's Turner Field or now Truist Park? So those are the 2 series to me, or the 2 focal points of Major League Baseball that you could concentrate on, because everything else is out to sea. Everything else is over and done with. There's nothing to discuss, nothing to get into. Everything has pretty much been put to rest in my eyes. I don't care how close the Royals are to the Guardians. I don't want to hear that the NL West, I mean, that's pretty much over with anyway, because I believe there's 7 back in the loss, both the Dodgers and both the Diamondbacks and Padres. Let me pull that up here real quick. NL West, yeah, both teams are 7 in the loss, 6 back. That's over. As we talked about for weeks on end, Brewers have the Central. Phillies, 7-game lead over the Mets and Braves. Astros, 5 in the loss, 4.5 back, but I'm not worried about Seattle. And that's it. Major League Baseball, you got nothing here as we head down to the final 3 weeks of the regular season. Now, let me turn my attention as I get out of the batter's box, and let me get into the white lines of the tennis court as I break out the racket. And what we saw here over the final few days, not a lot of drama. Yes, you did have a very interesting semifinal between the 2 American players, Frances Tiafoe and Taylor Fritz, where Fritz was down 2-1 going into the 4th set, but then Fritz bounced back nicely, winning 6-4 and then I believe 6-2 in that final set, or 6-1 in fact. So just when you thought, when you got to that final set, hey, maybe you could go deep, maybe you could get another tie-break set, that was not the case. Tiafoe ran out of gas, and Fritz, who a lot of people thought was the favorite going into that match, was able to overcome and get to a final for the first time in his career, where Jannik Sinner disposed of the Brit in a one Jack Draper. 3 sets, although the second set was a little bit interesting. As a matter of fact, there was a tiebreak set, 7-6-3, and even the first set, the Italian Sinner won 7-5, but then closed them out 6-2. So for Sinner to now get to a final to go up against Taylor Fritz, and there was no competition. He won 6-3, 6-4, and then 7-5 in that final set to capture his first U.S. Open. And this is after him suffering a bit of a wrist injury against Draper there on Friday night, where Draper was throwing up all over the course. I don't know if it was because of nerves or maybe something wasn't just sitting down or sitting well with his stomach, who knows. But for Sinner, now in the midst of controversy because the Tennis Federation did not crack down on the not 1 but 2 failed tests of some steroids that were taken due to a massage in between tournaments And think about it, where you had Simona Halep, a former number 1 overall on the women's side. She was suspended because, I don't know what the drug was, but she had to sit on the sidelines based on some doping and violating a policy. But for whatever it was almost as if, all right, well, Jannik Sinner, okay, we see that it was a mistake. You didn't know that the cream or whatever that was taken during the sessions, that you didn't know about it, nor did your therapist know that what was being taken there was banned on the list of substances by the Tennis Federation. So it's almost as if they didn't even fine him. I believe maybe there was a fine, come to think of it. But nary a slap on the wrist for Sinner. So even though he won fair and square, and he did not face Djokovic or Alcaraz, which could be argued here, but he can only face the opponents that he's going to come up against. He is your winner here of the 2024 U.S. Open. So Sinner, who it was his tournament to lose, and it would have been a shock if he lost, even if Fritz was on his game. But Sinner was able to prevail. He gets his first ever U.S. Open and his second Grand Slam overall. And speaking of second Grand Slams, you could also say the same for one Aryna Sabalenka, who now back-to-back finals, although lost last year in the final to Coco Gauff, but overcame and won there on Saturday afternoon. And for Sabalenka, who beat Emma Navarro in straight sets, and in the same fashion to Jessica Pegula, and Pegula had a great run in her own right, getting to a final for the first time. And for Pegula, who I was rooting for, she beat Karolina Muchova there in the semifinal, and I was rooting for Pegula. I wanted to see her win. I believe she's ranked 6th in the nation, or 6th overall as far as the women's side goes, but she fell short, losing in straight sets to Sabalenka. And I predicted Sabalenka at the start of the tournament. I thought that maybe it was going to be her time. I didn't believe in Świątek, although she got further than I thought, considering what she did at Wimbledon. But for Sabalenka to pretty much dispose of Navarro as well as Pegula in straight sets. And again, between the men's and the women's side, especially heading into the weekend, there was not a lot of drama, not a lot of fire, not a lot of edge of your seat. You want to say Tiafoe and Fritz there on Friday night? All right, I'll give you that, because Fritz was on the ropes there, but once he got his sea legs under him, winning 6-4, and we were hoping to see if we could get a long drawn out with a tiebreaker deep into the night. No, that was not the case, because that was 6-1 and good night the lights for Tiafoe and the men's semifinal. And that's it for tennis this year. You're going to have a scenario where I believe you may see in October, or maybe later this month, where you may see Rafael Nadal play, I believe, in one of those tournaments overseas, similar to what we saw in Roger Federer. Could this be a swan song? Could this be the end of Rafael Nadal because he will participate in this tournament? That we'll have to wait and see, but I figured I'd put that on your radar as we get a week plus into this month, deeper into the month, where they have, I believe it's the Davis Cup, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a different tournament, but you know I'll be on top of it as we get deeper into the month and beyond. And that'll do it, my good people. Let me see, can I squeeze in a couple of things? Yeah, let me squeeze in a couple of quickies here as I'm approaching 58 minutes. It's a little bit over an hour, depending if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, but let me close this out in a tidy fashion. NBA training camp start on the 30th, so you still have plenty of time, actually 3 weeks from today. But even less than that, you have both the Celtics and the Nuggets start their training camp on the 24th, because they have 2 exhibition games in Abu Dhabi. So they're going to start a little bit earlier because of the 2 games there overseas, over in the United Arab Emirates. But for all intents and purposes, training camp will open up 3 weeks from today. And with that, you'll have, speaking of the Nuggets, Jamal Murray paid handsomely with a 4-year, $208 million max extension. He deserves it. He came back from that ACL injury. He's a guy that's not afraid to take big shots. Had that big series against the Lakers in the opening round, making 2 buzzer beaters. We know the type of player he is to go along with Nikola Jokic. And even though they fizzled out in the second round in Minnesota, but Murray will stay part of the fold there with Jokic to see if they could run it back and go deep and maybe even try to capture another title this upcoming season. And then in the NHL, with training camp beginning on the 19th, just 10 days from now, you had 2 retirements here over the last week or so, where the Staal brothers, both Eric and Marc, retired. Eric, 18 years in the league, notably for the Carolina Hurricanes, who played on several other teams after that. Won a cup in 2006 as a member of the Hurricanes. Had his best season as a pro, 100-point mark. Had a big-time playoff. I believe he had 28 points during that Stanley Cup winning run. Calls it a career, very good player, good offensive player. And then his brother Marc Staal was also in the league for 17 years, a majority of that with the New York Rangers, signed the one-day contract and went off with his brother into the night as they both retire. So all the best to them in the next chapter of their lives as they close out 35 years combined of their hockey life playing in the National Hockey League. So kudos to them on 2 great careers, and obviously best of luck to them moving forward. Other than that, people, that's what I got. Another episode just about in the books as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, jreels.com, on YouTube at jreels. Please, people, I want to increase those viewers, those subscribers, because without your help there, how else are people going to find out about yours truly? So if you could play your part and do that, I would sincerely appreciate it. Take a screenshot, send it to me on social media at the aforementioned, or I shouldn't even say aforementioned, now the mentioned. Come on, get it together, J-Reels. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the J-Reels Podcast. On Twitter, X, J-Reels1, just a number. Or if you want to send me a question, comment, suggestion at the following, now I can say the aforementioned social media accounts or the email at thejreelspodcast@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I always say, talking sports since birth. And where else are you going to get all these sports in roughly a little bit over an hour in one podcast? I'm listening, still listening. I talk about it all, people. This is your one-stop shop for sports, as I do it with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the J-Reels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J-Reels Podcast, on the foot, baby.